All right, so we're going to be adding plaster to water. Very important. You do not want to mix the water. You don't want to agitate and move it around. No sticking your hand in it, nothing. You're going to be scooping plaster and letting it fall in between your fingertips. And what you're looking for is any rock or any solid material that may have accidentally gotten into the bag or didn't get pulverized enough, because you don't want a big chunk ending up in your block that you want to carve. So it's really important that you take your time and do this one right. Make sure you don't get your gloves wet at all or anything like that. So you open your bag of plaster, take a nice generous scoop of plaster out. It's really soft, it's really powdery, and it makes a big mess. So if you're not in a garage like I am, you want to try to do this outside on cement where you can hose it down, okay? Do not do this inside whatsoever. You're going to take the plaster and let the plaster fall carefully through your fingers right to the center of the bucket. You don't need to go anywhere else but the center. And there's a lot of different methods for mixing plaster. And the method that we're doing here is like a mountain or volcano method. So I'm just going to let the plaster keep falling. And you see how it sits at the top and then it slowly starts sinking. So we're not there yet. What we want to see is right here in the center, we want to see a mound of plaster that stays, almost like you could sit on top of the mountain and have a moment of meditation up there at the top. So it's not going to sink in. You're not going to drown in the water around your mountaintop. So you're going to just keep going. Don't pour all the plaster in. Take your time using your hands. No rushing. You don't want your plaster block to be so porous that you actually cannot carve it, and you don't want it to be so wet that it never dries. So you can see that it's hanging out longer on the top of the water, which is a great sign. So we're just going to keep putting a little bit more in. Now you see it's not sinking as quickly, right, as we were when we first started. And we're going to add some more here. Again, feeling for any hard rock material. If you find a hard rock, just put it to the side. It's staying a lot longer now, but it's still sinking. And you take another scoop and you just let it fall nice and slow. Now we're seeing, see how it looks like a little mountaintop there full of snow? And it's still sinking in, still cracking. And I do another. This scoop was a little bit smaller as I get closer and closer, so it's still almost there. Take another scoop, and I'm going to let that sit there, and you can kind of see it dissipate a little bit. Give it a little time, and if it remains dry up at the top, then I'm going to start mixing the plaster. There's a lot of different ways that you can mix plaster. I'm going to be using my hand. My box is pretty small, so my water level is low enough that I can get away with a regular glove. I'm going to give this a few minutes of just fully getting saturated and slaked down, so that way when I start mixing it, it'll be a little easier, and all the particles, everything will be ready to go. And so you can see that it's still staying dry up there at the top. And we'll just give it a couple more minutes. One thing I forgot to mention was how much water do you start with? And there's directions on your bag, but what I like to do is just guesstimate by looking at the size of my box. You want to think that plaster, the water you use is going to double. So what I did is I eyeballed how much water would it take to fit in just this region alone of my box, and just using my eyes as a way to guesstimate, I filled my water, and now you can see it's doubled in size. It's almost as tall as my box. So we'll see how it all turns out. It's still dry at the top. It's mostly slaked down. You can see there. I'm going to pull up my glove, and then what you're going to do is put your hand down, push all the plaster towards the sides. You don't want to create too much motion here, otherwise you're going to get big air bubbles in your plaster, and when you're carving you'll have this nice smooth surface, and then you'll find an area where you have pockets and empty holes, and you'll be bummed. So we're just going to kind of move this around. as soon as you start moving plaster, it immediately starts its process of hardening. So you don't want to stay too long in here. It's still really runny, and you can see some of the plaster still isn't completely mixed in completely. So I'll just keep going. And again, grabbing any chunks that you feel and smashing them in the sides, or finding the chunks and squeezing them. But you're basically just using your hand like a slow propeller, making sure that your fingertips hit the bottom, and you're going as slow as possible, not creating those air pockets. Once you feel like you have the plaster mixed up really well, there's two considerations that you want to have. How sturdy is your box? Some cardboard is sturdier than others. Some of us do a better taping job than others. So if your box doesn't feel as strong and sturdy as this one, you might want to let your plaster get a little thicker before you pour it in. Mine I'm feeling pretty good about. It's lined with the duct tape, so it's pretty secure. The other thing before I pour this in I want to mention is that you can line your piece with plastic like a garbage bag. You can line it with the garbage bag, and that can be for extra security, or maybe you don't have tape, or you just prefer to do this, or you're using a wooden planter or some other kind of container. So you can use a plastic bag. I would suggest that you use some tape and tape it down so it doesn't go anywhere. The problem is when you look in here, if you take time to really make this clean, you'll get less wrinkles and less folds. If I leave it like this and pour it in, the plaster is going to get all tangled up, and you're going to have some caught in the plaster. So it is a great technique. It's also great to do if you wanted to cast a bucket or a plastic bowl or shape like that. For us, we're going to just keep using this cardboard and duct tape, and you can also use a coating in the inside like Murphy's oil soap or Vaseline. If you're using plastic, that would be a good one. All right, so let's check on the plaster. It's getting a little thicker. I'm just going to give it a little bit more mix. Remember, as soon as it starts mixing, it's doing the hardening process. I'm going to just rinse off my gloves. If you're not using gloves, you just want to make sure you do not rinse your hands in a sink. You don't want the plaster going down there. I'm not going to be sticking my hands in the plaster anymore, so I'm going to move the gloves so I'm not dripping all over the place, and move those to the side and throw those in the trash. Now, see the bubbles up at the top? You want to start slowly tapping the plaster, and you should see some of those bubbles start to pop. And you might even see more bubbles come to the surface. So you can take a good amount of time making that happen. And what this is going to do is allow those to come to the surface and pop without you seeing it on your sculpture later on. Those 4 bubbles just won't go away from me. They're tormenting me. So you can spend some time doing that. If you're using a less wobbly surface, you can actually pick your bucket up and pound it on your table a little bit. That helps and is easy to do when you're using a smaller amount. So now I'm going to pour into my piece. If you've got a friend nearby or a family relative, they could hold it steady for you. My piece is pretty small, so I'm just going to start pouring slowly. I'm just going to pour a little bit in and make sure that my box doesn't go anywhere and I don't have any kind of leakage. If something is leaking, I have my modeling clay handy and I can kind of wedge it in one of the corners if that was going to happen. But everything looks good. I don't see any major problems, so I'm going to go ahead and pour the rest of my plaster. And I guess we'll just, maybe I should have kept my one glove on, but we'll just give it a little help and use all the plaster possible. Now I have a little plaster here. I got a lot of plaster in my bucket, and I have a bucket full of water nearby, so what I'll be doing is rinsing my hands and my bucket. If you let the plaster dry, you can just tap it out with your hand. It'll harden like a shell, almost like an egg. Now I already tapped out some of the bubbles, but what I'm going to do is just give it a little extra tapping, and that way those can come to the surface.